I am so excited to introduce you to my friend, Brenda Stewart. She's a licensed mental health counselor who brings both personal and professional experience to today's episode. Brenda honestly shares about how her early sexual trauma led to an eating disorder that almost took her life. After overcoming incredible odds, God directed her into the field of counseling. As we spoke, I couldn't help but think of Joseph's words in Genesis 50:20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. What Satan meant for evil in Brenda's life, God is using to do so much good in the world. In episode 7, we talk about Brenda's story, we talk about Rahab's story, we talk about the labels that we wear and how those labels do not define us. Hi, friend. You're listening to Find Hope Here. I'm your host, Teresa Whiting, author, speaker, ministry leader, friend, and fellow struggler. This is a podcast about the messy, complicated, painful parts of life, but also the beautiful, joy-filled hope that Jesus promises. Each week, we dig deep into God's Word together and talk about how His truth impacts our everyday lives. I'm not going to ask you to sit with me and have coffee because I seem to have my best conversations while I'm just doing life. So I'd love to hang out with you as you walk or fold laundry or drive to work. You're invited to join me in pursuing the hope God promises. No matter where you are or where you've been, I pray you always find hope here. Let's jump into today's episode. I'm so excited to introduce my guest today. Brenda Stewart is a licensed mental health counselor in Florida and Louisiana. She is the founder of Wellspring Therapy Associates, a clinically sound, faith-based practice in the Orlando area. She specializes in working with clients who struggle with trauma, eating disorders, and anxiety. Brenda also provides coaching and consultation to individuals, small groups, and organizations on the prevention and recovery of compassion fatigue and burnout. She's trained in EMDR, dialectical behavior therapy, and she is also a published author, speaker, and a popular podcast guest. What I love about Brenda is that she brings both personal and professional experience today. And I am honored to call her friend. It's really amazing that Brenda and I actually go back over 30 years, and I've seen her walk through seasons of brokenness and trauma and also healing. And now I see her on this side of the healing journey, and she is helping others with both a heart of empathy and also professional training and knowledge on how trauma works and how to heal. So it is so fun to have a friend on the podcast. And Brenda, welcome. Thanks for being here. Teresa. So as we begin, Brenda, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're passionate about helping women experience healing and freedom from trauma.
Well, thanks so much, Teresa, for having me on here. It's just a privilege, and I feel honored to be one of your guests and also to just have known you through different seasons of both of our lives. And interesting how God puts people into our lives at just the right time that's needed. So here we both are. And a little bit about me. I grew up as a pastor's daughter, loved being a pastor's daughter. It became something that I held on to as part of my identity for a long time, just as, I'm the PK, I'm the pastor's kid, things like that. Mm-hmm. I also experienced childhood sexual abuse from someone outside of the home. And then later sexual trauma in my early 20s. And so come from a story of personal wounding and deep pain, as well as God's faithfulness and redeeming of my story in so many ways. And so I'm just really thankful to be here. Part of what led me into this profession is my own healing journey. After experiencing childhood sexual abuse and carrying shame, insecurity, self-doubt, anxiety, right? All those coping responses that come when we've experienced pain that you're not aware of necessarily at the time. It's not like, oh, well, I'm going to have this anxiety to cover up that, like, that's not how we think. It's just an automatic sort of survival response that I think is a gift from God in a lot of ways to help us survive until we know how to do things differently. But through my own healing journey, after experiencing the anxiety, the self-doubt, self-consciousness, it led me into an eating disorder during my college years. And it was before eating disorders were really known. I found out it was an eating disorder, or named an eating disorder, through a magazine I was reading in one of my theology classes. And I probably didn't learn much from that theology class that day. And that's when I thought, oh, something is probably wrong. And that through the next really 10 to 12 years of my life was a pretty significant battle, a significant journey of feeling broken, feeling damaged, feeling unwanted, and struggling to survive, to find freedom. And through people God brought into my path through life-saving measures. I was on palliative care at one point. They didn't think I would make it. God has brought me through so faithfully. He's provided in so many ways. And it became a deep passion of mine to walk alongside others in their healing journey also. So that is what took me into this career field. And I'm so thankful.
I love it. As you're telling parts of your story, I get chills, because even though we haven't been, fully in touch for the whole 30 years, we have on and off, and I've watched you and I've seen you, come through some really significant challenges. And it's just so beautiful to see how you're using that, how you're taking the pain that you went through and using it to help other women heal. So I thank you for doing that. On the podcast, we have been talking about Rahab the past couple of weeks, and I'm curious, what ways do you resonate with Rahab, and what draws you to her story?
I think I love her story for a couple reasons. One, I think she was a woman of courage. Yes, she was known as, everybody thinks of Rahab the prostitute, or Rahab, the harlot, and that was part of her work, part of her behavior. And yet she also was a woman of great courage. She took in the spies, she hid them. She had known about the God of Israel, who was going to come in and potentially give over her hometown. She also was a woman of trust. She trusted what these spies told her, right? She had to bring all of her family into her house and hang out the red cord, and then her family would be saved. But she didn't have to trust. So I think I see her actively making choices, even in the midst of unknown. And I resonate a lot with that in my life. I've had to make choices to move forward, choices to trust who God is, his character, versus circumstances or what my human understanding might know. So I resonate in those ways. And then I also resonate professionally as I see clients come in with sexual trauma, sexual brokenness, and how they feel like their label is who they are. And just finding their identity in, like, I'm a trauma survivor, or I'm damaged goods. And yet Rahab that wasn't the end of her story.
Yeah.
Right? She's in the hall of faith as a faithful woman. She's in the line of Jesus. And so her past did not define her. And I just love that. My past doesn't define me. Yours doesn't define you.
Yep.
Whoever's listening, it doesn't define them. And that's so hopeful.
Yes, I love that. Is there anything else you want to say about labels? Because I know that's a big theme in Rahab's story, that I don't know how many times she's labeled as Rahab the prostitute, but that's the label that she has in scripture. And yet that doesn't define her. And I think that is so critical. And what you just said about that our labels don't define us, was there anything else you wanted to say about that?
I could probably go on all day about this topic, but I will try to make it short. I think, when we look at what labels really are for, I think we live in a society of labels, right? I'm a business owner. I'm a mom. I'm a teacher. I'm a pastor's wife or pastor's kid. I'm a therapist. I'm an athlete. We live and we are associated with labels. And while on one hand, labels can be helpful, for example, if I have bronchitis, I need the doctor to diagnose or label me correctly so that I get the correct medication so that I can heal. I think they define roles that we might be in life, but so often I see labels as taken as someone's identity. And that's where labels can be very limiting. So labels can be effective to help with a good treatment plan or to, fulfill responsibility. But where they become limiting is when we start to use that as our identity. And we start to look at, okay, I, Brenda, equal trauma survivor, or I, so-and-so equal anxiety, or I equal being, broken. When I have this conversation with clients a lot of, is that really who you are? Or is that the natural result of what has occurred in your life? Right? That's a natural result or natural response to the wounding or to the pain. But let's discover and uncover who you truly are. And then the labels that might be, okay, I am labeled, someone who's neurodivergent, who their brains work differently. It's not less than, it's not bad. It's just, okay, let's learn how to make the most in who we are created to be so we can live effectively and fulfill God's purpose for us rather than it being our identity.
Oh, that's good. Talk about how women can learn to listen to God's voice about their identity over voices of the enemy or other people, or even the voices in their own heads. How can they start moving from listening to those voices to listening to God's voice?
Yeah, that's a super important thing to be able to do and not easy, especially with pain in your past. And so one of the things that I do that I find really effective is we first have to know who God is, right? Who's the character of God? Is the voice I hear in alignment to what I know God to be? And a lot of times the voice in our head or I call it the inner critic or the poison parrot that sits on our shoulder and only knows how to say one thing, like, you're not enough, you should do it better, you need to do this, or really, that's such a loser. Those are not congruent with who God is or how God would speak. So I think first being able to hear the voice of God and lean into that is knowing who God is and knowing his character. And then being able to identify the other voices, right? Where is this coming from? Is this an internalized message from my trauma? Is this a message I received from childhood, from somebody who was judgmental? Or is this a message of something God would actually say? Or is it from the enemy? And so being able to determine the voice of truth is first and foremost. And then one of the things I like to do is I think we need to be still. We're in a society where we're so busy all the time. And so being able to say, okay, where is some time that I can be still and listen? And I don't know about you, but when I try to do that, all the things that I have on my mind start flooding. It's like, oh, I got to remember this. I got to do this.
It might be even scary, I think, for women to be still, because
very true.
We don't want to think. We don't want to process. So maybe it's an unconscious unwillingness to be still. I don't know.
Oh, that's a really good point. No, I think that's a good point. Yes, there's a level of needing to avoid, right? Because if we get still, what if it's too much? What if it's too painful? And I think that's a very real concern. It's valid based on people's stories. And also, I think I like to do it, just start in small doses, right? Set a timer for 1 minute. If 1 minute feels like pushing you to the edge, and just say, okay, how can I be still? And maybe don't just have this open-ended mindset, right? But have, okay, God, what do you want to speak to me? Or take one phrase of who God says you are. I am chosen, right? Okay, let me just ponder that for a moment. I am chosen, and what comes up for me. And then we build into more times of being able to be still longer. And I'm a very visual person. So I like to visualize a space like, okay, God, here's a space where I can meet with him. Right. And as I notice where I'm at in that moment, maybe I feel heavy that day. Maybe I feel anxious or unsure. And then I allow God to meet me in that space. And what would he say to me? How would he look at me? What does he want me to know? And that can be a powerful place to maneuver and look into.
Yes, that's a really practical and beautiful suggestion. The goal of this podcast is to provide hope for our listeners. And many of them have experienced sexual brokenness, or, I mean, we all experience brokenness of one sort or another because we live after the fall. So how does Rahab's story provide hope? What hope do you see in her story?
I think Rahab's story is filled with hope that the past does not define us. Our experiences, our shortcomings, our pain does not define us, and it can be used to fulfill great purpose that God has for us. And we might not see in where we stand today what that is, right? We don't know what the end of the road is. So it's a lot of trust, but believing that God can do incredible things through us, even in the midst of our story that might be messy, that might be painful, that might be not what our 6-year-old childhood dream was. But that doesn't define us. It's not who we are. And we can lean into the creator of the universe, who he says we are, one who knows us more intimately than anyone, right? And he says we're chosen, we're valued, we're loved, we have purpose, we're overcomers. And so I feel like that is so hopeful.
When I was looking around on your website, I saw a word over and over again, and that was the word freedom. And I think so many women long for freedom and they don't know how to get it. So as a therapist, you know, I love that you come to us both with personal and professional experience, but as a therapist, you have insight into how trauma works, you know, what it does, and also how women can find freedom. So can you provide our listeners with some practical advice on how to move toward freedom? And let me put this little caveat in there. You know, I imagine therapy is probably one of the most important things, but if somebody can't get into therapy, you know, what are some practical things, just a few things that she could do to move toward freedom?
Sure. That's a great question. I agree. When you're desiring freedom, first of all, know it's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. It requires some grit and perseverance. And if someone can go to therapy, I highly recommend it, not just because I am a therapist, but it's just really helpful because trauma especially impacts all aspects of a human being and at a very foundational level. It's healable, it's recoverable, but sometimes it requires professional help, and that's okay. It's not a weakness. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with you or you should be stronger. It just is a reality of the impact of things. But if someone is not able to attend therapy for various reasons, a couple of things I would suggest. One is to know that our past plays out in our present until it's resolved or healed. It's just how our brains and our bodies work. And so reflecting on what are the things that you're currently struggling with? What are the symptoms, so to speak? Is it anytime you hear a loud noise, you startle, like an exaggerated startle response? Is it you live in a high stress state all the time and are unable to sort of come to a place of rest in your nervous system? Are you bombarded by inner criticism of these thoughts that go through your head that are not helpful, right? So identify what are your stuck points right now? What are your obstacles keeping you from freedom? And then let's back into that. So once you have that done, I think, well, let me back up. One of the ways I like to do that is draw a circle. And then almost like a pie chart, as holistic beings, were physical, mental, emotional, relational, and spiritual. So break it into 5 parts and then look at your struggles in each area. Not to discourage you. We all have them, right? We haven't arrived, as you said earlier. We're not perfect, but look at what maybe some of those obstacles are. And then look at where these might stem from. So you have the awareness, the impact. Look at whose voice you're listening to, who's the voice in your head. Really get into scripture and find out who God says you are, what he says about you. Begin to challenge those thoughts that you have with truth. Your thought might feel true. Like back early in the journey, I felt not good enough. I felt damaged, and that felt 100% true to me. But sometimes it takes a safe other, a friend, a pastor, a pastor's wife, a relative to say, that is trauma-based truth or truth based in your pain. But that's not who God says. That's not God's source of truth. So being able to differentiate and begin to challenge those automatic thoughts that go through your mind. And then the next place would be find community. Healing and freedom doesn't happen alone. So finding a community of people where you can be real, where you can have people come alongside you and help hold your arms up when you feel too weak. People that are not going to judge you, but that are safe. And I understand someone might be like, well, I don't know how to find that. That's hard to find. It is. I agree. Right. And in a community where a lot of people we go towards technology for friendships instead of in-person relationships, but don't give up trying. Keep finding those safe people, that community. And then I think a couple practical things just for the nervous system. I'm kind of a brain and nervous system nerd.
Love it. I love this. I think it's so fascinating how God made us holistic. I have just been reading The Body Keeps the Score, and it's
great book.
Unbelievably accurate on the effects of trauma. And it's crazy reading that book now. I'm over 50 years old, and I'm seeing things that are revealing things from my past, and it's just so eye-opening. But also I just want to mention to our listeners that if you're like, oh my goodness, this is so much good stuff, and you're driving or cooking and you can't write this stuff down, we will have a link in the show notes to all this information, because Brenda, you're just giving out a lot of really practical, helpful thoughts, and I want to make sure that this is something that they can get their hands on. All right, so keep going.
Yes, please don't write it down while you're driving. We don't want any accidents. You can contact me or Teresa and we'll get it to you. So from a very physiological nervous system perspective, when you've been in trauma or experienced pain or a lot of high stress environments, your nervous system is like a revved engine a lot of the times, and it struggles to come to a place of rest, where kind of optimally your body can work, your organs, your, vessels, everything can just be in a state of homeostasis. And so there's a couple of things to help with that. One is, I'm not going to go too into this because it'll probably be a little bit overwhelming, but I would go on YouTube and look up vagus nerve exercises. So your vagus nerve is one of the longest nerves in your body, and it connects to all your major organs. And it's very integral in the process of healing and your body's ability to kind of fluctuate with stress and then come back down to normal. And that gets really off balance in times of trauma. And so there's some simple exercises that can be fun that stimulate the side of the vagus nerve called the ventral side that really helps your body come to a place of calm or rest. So things like gargling or humming. There's different exercises around the tips of your ears that can stimulate it, but those could be practical tools that people can search for on YouTube and try some of the vagus nerve exercises. And then there's one other skill that I'll just go by here. If you find yourself in a state of high stress, high anxiety, distress a lot, there's something called the TIP skill. So T stands for temperature change. I is intense exercise. Now, I want to kind of parenthesis or caveat that if you're somebody who struggles with an eating disorder, this needs to be taken to your doctor or dietitian therapist before saying, oh, intense exercise when we run 30 miles, right? Intense exercise in this situation means I might for 1 minute do jumping jacks.
Mm-hmm.
I might drop to the ground and do push-ups for as long as I can, which for me wouldn't be very long. So this basically I need to release some of this energy from my body is the goal.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
P is for paced breathing. So we breathe, obviously, because we're alive, but do we actually breathe in a way that's effective and helpful? Most of us don't. We breathe shallow or quick, or we don't take the benefit of breathing. So if we do deep breaths in through our nose and then hold it, and then breathe out, so your exhale is longer than your inhale,
Mm-hmm.
it starts to kind of regulate. And there's a lot of fun breathing activities. You can have fun. I think I have some on my website if people want some additional ideas.
Yeah,
and then
we'll
the
link
other
to
P
that
is
too.
the other P is progressive muscle relaxation. So that's something that also you can do on YouTube, but it's you go through all the various muscle groups in your body, you clench and then release, clench and release, and it just reduces the tension and distress. So those are a couple skills if you just want like some quick go-tos as you're navigating the process also.
Those are really helpful. And like I said, we'll link those and people can
Hope it wasn't
go on
too
your
overwhelming.
website. No, I think it's helpful because something might work for one person and then somebody else might want to try one of the other ideas. So I think it's great to give people options. Is there anything else about this topic of rehab or labels or trauma or freedom? Anything that I missed that you want to touch on?
I think well, first of all, with the skills, as you said, some work for some people and not for others. That is very true. So if you find one that is effective for you, great. If you find it's not, keep searching, because a lot of us need a toolbox of a variety of things that work in different moments and in different seasons. And so the other piece with skills or tools that you try, be careful with what you're expecting them to do. I get a lot of feedback. I'm like, that skill didn't work, or that wasn't helpful. That didn't do what I needed it to do. And I was like, well, what are you wanting it to do? Right. And it's to take away all the other stuff, but that's not what it's designed to do. Rather, these skills help us tolerate the intensity of the moment so that we can do that deeper work that's needed. So the purpose and your expectation, if you try some of these skills, just thought I'd throw that out there also.
That's helpful. That's helpful. Tell us more about Wellspring Therapy and Associates. Like how is your practice different than, say, just a typical therapy practice out there?
Wellspring was designed to be a whole person wellness center. And so I started Wellspring about 2 years ago and just launched into a group practice this past summer. So we're in a big growth curve, but I really want to care for the whole person. And so a lot of times counseling centers will just care for the mental health piece, and then you refer out to deal with nutrition or whatever it might be, physical movement. And so my goal is that Wellspring is known as a really solid faith-based practice. So our clinicians here at Wellspring are all believers, and where we practice excellent clinical care. We're continuing to learn and grow so that the therapists are very skilled in the work they do with clients. The therapists also do their own work so that therapists themselves are in a place of health and wellness to be able to work. Clients can come and be able to feel safe, cared for, and known, seen and understood as they walk through the doors of Wellspring. And then we're looking to create a wellness center where our clinical team will be solid, and then we'll add dietitians, life coaches, spiritual life coach, potential yoga, dance movement, things like that, so that pie that I was talking about, we can care for the whole person.
That is really neat. I'm excited about your vision for what Wellspring would be. And also, I want our listeners to know that we have some really exciting news. Brenda and I are actually going to team up and plan a retreat together in the fall. So it's going to be both biblically rich and clinically informed. And you'll go home with practical application. Just imagine being at a setting where you can kind of learn both biblical knowledge and practical application, and be with people who are deep in the word and also trauma informed. I just think it's going to be a healing retreat. And it's going to be in Florida because that's where we both live. And I was thinking about it this morning. I'm like, oh, it would be great if we were doing it in March, because that's when everybody is just so done
for winter.
Yes. But maybe we'll do another one. So we'll do one in the fall, and
the first of many.
Yes, maybe we'll do another one next winter or next spring, when everybody is like, okay, it's supposed to be warm and it's still snowing.
And then we need to do one up north in August.
Yes. So if you're interested in that, make sure you get on my email list, because I'll be sending out updates on details as we start making plans for that. And also, don't forget to look in the show notes for all the things that we talked about. Brenda, I am a big reader. I love to read. So I'm looking for book recommendations, and they can be any kind of books. It doesn't have to be, trauma-based or counseling therapy books. It could be fiction, nonfiction, whatever. What are some good books that you have read and loved?
Let's see. Well, recently I just had a dog go blind. So I've been reading on how to help your blind dog, and they have some really great books out there. So if anybody has blind animals, another one I love is Try Softer by Andy Kolber. I think you've read that one, haven't you?
Yes. We talked about it when I was reading it.
Yes. Okay. So that's a great one. Another one that really stood out to me in my journey was Disappointment with God by Philip Yancey. It's one of his older ones, but it was really powerful. As there can be a lot of disappointment, like, why, God, why did you let this happen? And it's a really great book to kind of work through some of those questions. And then another one I love right now is called The Next Right Thing by Emily P. Freeman. I think that's one you like also.
Yes, I think I've read it several times.
Yes. For someone who wants to read more about trauma, Getting Past Your Past by Francine Shapiro can be good. It's a secular book, but helpful.
Wow,
those
that's
are probably my go-tos.
Great list. I love it. And as we close out, tell listeners how can they connect with you?
Sure. Well, I have a website, wellspringtherapyassociates.com, and that has the contact information, email or phone number. We also have social media handles on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And then we just yesterday launched a YouTube channel. So we will be uploading content and videos, helpful tips, trainings, things like that on there. So feel free to reach out in any of those avenues.
That is wonderful. I don't know if people know this, but I also have a YouTube channel for this podcast.
Yay. That's
However, awesome. I haven't figured out how to upload the videos and do all the things. So someday you'll actually get to watch this interview live, not live, but on YouTube, if you prefer watching. I know some people love YouTube. Some people love podcasts. I'm more of a podcast person, but I know that there are YouTube people out there. So I'm glad that you have started a channel, because that'll give people tools even in the area of freedom and recovery. So yes. Thank you for being on today. I am just delighted that you were here. I'm so excited for our plans together for the future.
Me too.
I'm just thankful that you were able to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Therese, for having me. And just one last thought for listeners is just know that you are valuable, you are worthy, you are deserving of freedom, and it's possible. So keep taking steps forward in the process.
Yes, and amen. Thanks for hanging out with me today on Find Hope Here. To find anything I mentioned on the episode, go to teresawhiting.com/listen. That's where you can find all the show notes. And remember to hit that subscribe button. If you want to go the extra mile and leave a review, that would be amazing and it would mean so much to me. I'd like to leave you with this prayer from Romans 15:13. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit, you may abound in hope.